Cyberpunk, The Flame That Remains. Written and read by Ethan Taplin. Chapter 6. Kindling. Night City, 2075. The moment she crossed the silver threshold, the world unraveled. Sound collapsed inward, color blurred into inky blackness. Cyberspace dissolved around her, not like melting code, but like breath stolen from the lungs. For a while, there was only stillness. Then came light. It bloomed beneath her feet, threading into a bridge of fractured prisms suspended in the endless dark. A path of rainbow light glowing softly like a memory half remembered. She stood at the edge, unsure if she was walking forward or being pulled. Each step sent pulses of color radiating away from her, like ripples through still water, echoes through bone. There was no sky, just her and the path, and the hush of an infinite distance. Two shapes accompanied her in the void, black and nearly imperceptible within the void through which they soared on silent wings. Black against black. Muspelheim. One of the ravens alighted on her shoulder, staring at her with a single eye. The name struck her like thunder in a quiet cathedral. Muspelheim. They knew her name. No, not her name. An old name that belonged to someone else. They still called her Muspelheim. The system, the mask, the ever-watchful eyes. Prosopon. Her chains clung to old names. But that wasn't who she was anymore. Not really. She had chosen a name for herself, not one forged in a boardroom or whispered by a handler. Something older. Something hers. Nornir. A weaver of threads, a reader of echoes, a ghost walking backward through her own story. Not a weapon lit by someone else's fire. A spark she struck with her own hands. The bridge shimmered with that thought, her thought, and for a moment, it felt as though the code beneath her feet had accepted it, responded. The raven on her shoulder stared. As she walked, glyphs and masks shimmered and rotated as they formed in the void beneath the bridge. Broken visors, ceremonial crowns, jagged faces. Some she recognized, but could not recall. It filled her with vertigo as she stood on the verge of memory. The second raven alighted on the bridge and stared with the first, watching her intently as she approached the end of infinity. At the path's terminus stood an archway, formed of molten shards and splintering data. It resembled a broken crown atop a painted mask, torn in two. She approached. Intellect Mask 13. Prosopon Extension Node. Bifrost Protocol. She tasted static. Her fingers twitched as the information flooded unprompted into her mind. Whether it was the remnants of a corrupted log or an identification protocol, she wasn't sure, but she was growing sure of something else. Mask. Intellect. Prosopon. She thought she burned a rogue. Nothing more than a fragmented echo caught between firewalls. She was wrong. So very wrong. This wasn't a shard of chaos. It was a face. A discarded identity. One of Prosopon's many masks. This wasn't something lost in the ruins and wreckage of the old net. It had been waiting. The ravens watched as Muspelheim looked around herself again, observing the bridge crumbling into pixelated dust behind her. She stepped through the broken crown. The ravens stared. 1,000 eyes joined them. She found herself in the last place she ever wanted to return to, surrounded by the glass domes and sterile hallways that filled the cave called the Corpse Shore. Naustrund. Home. Her head ached. The world around her spun. She felt the razors of cold against her bare skin. A sun threatened to ignite inside her head. She began to trace a familiar path down the silent halls. The ravens went with her. Their wings made no sound, they cast no shadows. One perched on an exposed conduit out of her reach. The other walked beside her, claws tapping against the tile, always 3 steps back. She did not look at them. She didn't want to know if they would still be there if she did. The hallway stretched ahead, steel-paneled on her left, glass-walled to her right and above, filled with the faint hum of ventilation that had once lulled her to sleep. Here, in the false warmth of memory, she should have known what came next. A left turn, then a short walk to the training dome. But as she moved forward, something slipped. The turn and stretch of corridor came, and came again. The corridor folded to the left twice, then 3 times. The same scuff mark on the floor passed underfoot. A hairline crack across one of the wall lamps traced the same curve, flickered the same way. She stopped. The hallway continued. She turned back. The same sight greeted her. She closed her eyes and felt a gust of air pass her face, even though the air was perfectly still, or perhaps was not there at all. When she opened them again, she stood at the corridor's entrance. The ravens were waiting. "You took the wrong path," one might have said. Or maybe it was just the wind. She tried again, tracing the same path. This time, the training dome was waiting at the end of it. The door was open, but the chamber inside was dark, filled with static and white noise, like an old television caught between signals. She stepped to the threshold and saw movement in the dark. Herself, or someone shaped like her, sitting in a metal chair, arms bound, head lowered. She stepped forward. The lights flickered. The corridor returned. Same entrance, same tiles, same ravens. But something was different now. The paneling on the left wall had begun to rust away, revealing black cables underneath, sinew beneath skin. The lights overhead no longer flickered. They pulsed in time with her heartbeat. She glanced at one of the ravens. It looked back, its eye glowing red. She retraced her steps again. The corridor folded to the left. She stepped over the same scuff mark on the floor. The corridor folded. She stepped over the scuffed floor. Fold, scuff, fold, scuff, drop. Her foot found no purchase. The floor gave way. She fell through silence, no wind, no weight, until the color and sound returned with a snap. She was on her back, small and motionless, unable to lift her arms. Every part of her body ached, almost like it did not yet belong to her. Her limbs felt new, untested. Her skin itched like it had never been exposed to air. She couldn't see past the bright light overhead, but she could hear her own breath, short, shallow, and unfamiliar. There was movement above her, a figure leaning into view. It was her mother. She was crying. A masked doctor stood beside her, cloaked in sterile green, but it was her mother's face, sharp and perfect and glowing with sweat, that filled Sophie's view. She felt her mother's lips press against her forehead, and her platinum hair brush against her cheeks. A mechanical voice hummed in the background, flat and unaffected. Subject 13. Codename assigned. Muspelheim. Muspelheim, her mother whispered, as if confirming it for herself. She didn't say Sophie. No. Her next words were, "You will be my greatest creation." From the edge of the room, 2 red-haired girls stood in silence. They watched with almost horrified intrigue. They said nothing aloud, but the taller of the two seemed to mumble incessantly to herself as she pulled a blanket tighter around her shoulders. She was always cold. Alfheim, Vanaheim, they were watching a birth, and they knew it wasn't supposed to happen this way. Fire retains shape. Fuel supply sufficient. The ravens fluttered their wings nearby as the corridor twisted around her once more, spiraling in on itself until it led her to the doors of the surgical wing. Echoed screams bade her not to enter, but the doors swung open despite the warning. The only section of the complex without glass ceilings, the surgery center was dark, lit only by red emergency lights. The ravens forged ahead, leading her on with far more courage than she felt as she slowly followed. In the dark, she saw none of the eyes she knew were watching her from every angle. She turned and found herself in an operating room, the exit vanishing behind her. Her vision was suddenly flooded with light. A sharp scent hit her, sterile, metallic, and vaguely sweet. The ravens roosted on the arm holding the bright light that shone down on the surgical table. She knew this room, had been here many times, lying on the table. This time, however, she was also watching from outside the light. The girl on the table was 11 years old, her elder sibling standing over her. Marker lines crisscrossed her shoulders and back, incisions waiting to be made. Face down on the table, Sophie could not see the tears she remembered running down her face, but she knew they were there. The Sophie on the table couldn't move, couldn't defend herself. The Sophie watching from outside the light could do nothing to change the past. 4 others were gathered in the room. A boy barely older than the girl on the table, a doctor shrouded in sterile green, and the red-haired twins. The boy was Rune, Helheim. He stood by a stack of machines monitoring Sophie's vital signs. Astrid stood outside the light, unusually quiet. Next to her stood the doctor. He had not been the one to perform this surgery. No, he was only here to grade Vanaheim's performance. Vanaheim, Liv, stood over Sophie, hands steady despite her ragged breathing. Her eyes were red, but tears no longer welled up in them. She glanced at Rune, who nodded. Her pulse is elevated, but her vitals are stable. Liv lifted a scalpel from the tray, her eyes passing over the set of cybernetics laid out above her tools, a pair of metallic arms, and a series of interlocked plates that would be placed against Sophie's spine. She pressed the scalpel into the flesh of her sister's shoulder, beginning incisions. Sophie screamed in time with herself as she felt the unfiltered pain once more. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, Liv sobbed quietly. Her hands were steady, her eyes never left her work, but her breath hitched. She didn't look at the girl under her knife, couldn't. Behind her mask, her lips moved constantly, silent prayers or desperate reassurances, it wasn't clear. Almost done, she whispered under her breath. Almost done, almost done. She pulled on nerves and wires, fusing them together. She stitched, stapled, and glued. She worked for an hour before she was certain that the mounting for the right arm prosthetic was in place. When she was, she moved to Sophie's left side and began the process again. The finale was next. Liv dragged a fresh scalpel down Sophie's back and exposed her spine. The bones glistened with blood as Liv turned and retrieved the last implant, the Sandevastan. She gently laid the interlocking metal plates against Sophie's spine. She slowly, carefully connected the wires, sliding them through tiny holes drilled through Sophie's vertebrae to fuse directly to her central nervous system. Liv had successfully completed the implantation process for the arms, but even if she hadn't, Sophie would have been perfectly fine after additional operations to repair the mounting sockets. There would be no second chance here. Future Sophie, watching from across the operating table, saw this thought flicker across her elder sister's face, and knew that if Liv hadn't performed this task perfectly, her younger self wouldn't have left the table alive. Nerve bindings are sinking. Let's test her for loot bleed. Rune's eyes flicked across the other child's bloody form, then back to the data readouts he was monitoring. Liv had sealed the flesh around the mounts for Sophie's implants, but the arms were not yet connected, and the Sandevistan's metal plates would forever trace down her back along her spine as a reminder of innocence lost. Sophie, I'm so sorry. Liv leaned down near the little girl's ear. This next part is going to hurt worse than any pain you'll ever know again. I'm sorry I couldn't apply any anesthetic, Sophie. The Sandevistan can't integrate properly if your nerves are slowed by even the smallest amount. She looked to the doctor, who lifted a remote and pressed the activation switch. The scream tore from the girl's lungs like it had been caged behind her ribs for 1,000 years. High, raw, ragged. She writhed against her restraints, eyes wide and blinded with pain. Green light illuminated her back. Liv gasped and clasped her trembling hands together. She's not ready for this. She doesn't have to be ready, Helheim replied too calmly. She has to adapt, like we all did. She's not like the rest of us, Liv's voice cracked. She's going to break. If she breaks, we get to build her better. Sophie wished she could cover her ears, but it wouldn't matter. The information was being loaded directly into her brain. She wished she could protect the girl on the table, covered in blood, tears raining onto the floor below. Sophie couldn't comfort herself. Instead, a new hand rested on the younger Sophie's shoulder. Unbothered by the red now staining her hand, Astrid gently squeezed the shrieking child's shoulder. She had remained unmoving until that moment, observing, nothing more. But as she often did, she provided Sophie with much-needed comfort at just the right moment. She crouched beside the table, anchoring herself next to the sobbing child. "Please don't hold it in," she whispered softly to the girl watching as much as the one on the table. "Pain does not make you weak. It means you're still becoming." Her voice was quiet between the screams, the pause between shudders. It carried no authority, no command, just presence. One day, you'll make them regret thinking you were soft. Fire retains shape. Fuel supply, sufficient.